Welcome to the Lightforge. This is ADWCTA.
This is Merps, and we are coming at you with a pre-recorded Lightforge. This is not live. ADWCTA, you have somewhere to go this week, do you not?
I do. I have a wedding to go to tomorrow.
Very
This is
nice.
Saturday. It's pretty like at least on schedule. This is one of those things where we record on a Wednesday and then we like save it for 4 days, and then a lot of things happen and people are like, "Why didn't you talk about that?"
Right.
Hopefully nothing major is going to happen in the next like literally 24 hours. And then we'll basically have a normal Lightforge.
Right. It could. So I wanted to get this out.
Yeah.
If something huge happens during Saturday night or Sunday during the day, it will not be covered, and we will cover it next week. But for this week, we are solidly in the KFT meta. I think we've all had some time to get some runs under our belt. I think a lot of the community has gotten a lot of runs as well. And you know what that means. As soon as people get comfortable, people get a little bit antsy, they get a little bit restless, and the complaints start to happen, right? The hype has died down, and everyone is looking for fingers to point. And it seems as though the first target anyways, has become Death Knights, the hero cards.
The first target of the KFT meta, like the actual meta, not like the whole synergy stuff that got like put in like a day before KFT. This is like the actual cards from KFT and what it's doing in the arena.
Right. So people have basically played against these cards and they were like, wow, they're pretty powerful and I don't enjoy this. So let's tell everyone about this. But
yeah, let's tell everybody about that second. Let's start with what's actually happening in the meta. But we just want to set it up that we will talk about this is the official Death Knights podcast for the Lightforge, and then we'll probably not talk about Death Knights again. Like probably not ever,
unless something happens.
Unless something happens. But generally speaking, they're legendaries. We don't deal a lot with legendaries. So this is actually probably the first time on the Lightforge that we talk specifically about legendary cards. Because they're kind of important in this meta. They went the opposite way here with quests, and where quests weren't in the arena, these guys are. They have offering bonuses. 2 of them are synergy cards apparently. Like you're gonna see them in the arena. So we'll deep fried meta it. We'll talk to you about the theories behind it, and we'll tell you how to play around it, and we'll tell you how to like beat them, like which is probably the most important thing. Because really, I think both me and Merps are have had enough experiences against Death Knights and enough good experiences where like we haven't lost against that many Death Knights. So it feels a little disproportionate, the amount that people are complaining about Death Knights versus what we've actually seen in game. So maybe we have a better way of dealing with it than most people. We'd want to share that later. But for now, why don't we talk about what's happening in the arena generally? Like when you go into the arena, it's the KFT meta. They've been tweaking the synergies. There's still the first two picks are still synergies, but they're no longer as oppressive. They've like more than doubled the pool of cards that are available, and it feels like at least that they've also like tweaked down things like Egg and things that require like Blubber Baron, like things that require blatantly like large amounts of synergies to trigger. Like, I think there may be some kind of adjustment that's not a 1-to-1 ratio in those 2 picks. But regardless, they're tweaking it in a way in which I think the synergy picks are not as oppressive in the arena as they were like a month ago. We're now more into the KFT actual meta. So what is that about? Just set synergy picks aside for now, which is still probably one of the most important parts of drafting.
Right. Well, just a quick comment on that. It does seem like they've changed it, and I have found myself more often surviving, quote unquote, the first 2 picks with like a 2/3 Murloc and also a Tovir Stone Shaper. I'm like, this is fine. This is totally fine. I have a standard 2-drop and a somewhat subpar 4-drop, and I'm cool with that. Right. So they have changed it, and I have seen significantly like less eggs, which is a step in the right direction, although there's
so if you're wondering, just because we're not going to say too much about this, but if you're wondering how to do synergy picks, our advice has not changed since we first like played with synergy picks. Your job is not to go with the synergy picks. Your job is to survive the synergy picks. Pick anything that looks as neutral as possible. Every time we stream, people keep wanting Servant of Kalamos. Unless you're a mage or a shaman, do not pick Servant of Kalamos unless your other picks are actual crap. Like if there's a Tovir versus a Servant of Kalamos, like pick the Tovir when it's unless you're a major shaman. And that's because major shamans have more elementals expected to be offered. So like when your effect is bigger and in need of elementals, it's better. Otherwise, you have a pretty decent chance still of screwing over your draft. And if you're a good player, you don't want to like lose by draft, right? Like that's, if you have enough basic tools, you'll be able to do okay. But if you try to go for it, your chances of making like a great deck is like maybe like 50% more. Your chances of making a okay deck is a lot less. Your chance of making a totally non-functional deck is like 5 to 10 times higher. So don't do that.
Yeah. So taking away the synergies for a second, right? It seems as though, like, when we discussed this, like, while we were prepping for the podcast, we were just like, wow, how would we describe the meta, right? Like, we want to talk about the meta. We're just like, yeah, we're doing well, but can't really pinpoint exactly what. Like, we can't really nail down anything special about the meta, right? And I think that's when we realized that there is a huge amount of class convergence going on here. You know, while facing.
Well, let's not say that there's nothing special going on with the meta. It is the buff meta, right? It is the reward the board meta. That's been happening like crazy, like every class. But that's exactly what the convergence is, right? Like, we talked about reward the board a lot leading up to the KFT release. We talked about it a lot on the first Lightforge after that. Then we talked about classes. We talked about mulligans. You know, just like ancillary stuff to the main meta. But the main meta hasn't changed. And we don't want to really just repeat ourselves repeatedly and be like, watch out for Bone Mare. Death Speaker. Death Speaker?
Death Speaker, yes.
Death Speaker is going to get you. It's in every class now. You know, you can, other buffs are existent. The dragon thing also exists. Like, don't let your opponent have a board, even if it's small things, because they'll get bigger. We don't want to keep saying that. But the point that we do want to make is this convergence point, which kind of comes off of that, right? Because if every class is rewarded for having the board and they are all getting buffed, what's happening?
Right. So let's take it back a little bit and talk about how Hearthstone has sort of dealt with convergence before, because this is a topic that we've talked about before, and this is a topic that we've addressed not in the neutral pool though. This is something that we've addressed. For example, when Rogues got Dark Iron Skulker, oh my God. If you remember, you know, we were just like, this is a good card, but we don't like the design of this, right?
Like, the card is overpowered, but more than that, the design was the most awful thing. And Blizzard agreed. Blizzard actually released a statement like a few months ago, like earlier in the year, that was like, we will never print another card like Dark Iron Skulker again for Rogue. And we're like, yes, good job, Blizzard. Way to figure out your own classes.
Right. And it's also one of the reasons that I disliked Twilight Flamecaller, right? I just did not think that
I still disagree with you on that.
Yeah, I know you do, but you know, I'm sticking with my stance.
Okay,
right?
Okay, because Arcane Explosion is literally a basic card, I think, or a common one, or a classic card at least. It's probably a basic card.
It is, but I think the 2/2 body for 1 mana is so significant. Because
but you also, we're going to talk about Dark Conviction for our card good bad later, but like, right. I'm guessing you also think Dark Conviction is different than Oldemon. And you think Abyssal Enforcer is different than Hellfire.
Wait, by different you mean?
Well, in the same way that Twilight Flamecaller is different than Arcane Explosion, one is like fine, and the other one is like somehow violating a principle of like how classes exist.
Oh no! I don't think like it's totally like that. Okay. I think mages should be exposed somewhat, right? But I think Twilight Flamecaller just like is a more powerful version, like to such a degree.
But that's what I wanted to draw a distinction from, because you're trying to bring Twilight Flamecaller into this convergence thing, and what I'm trying to say is Dark Iron Skulker is a very different animal.
True. Yeah.
Like, Dark Iron Skulker literally does something that the class is not supposed to do and has never done before. Twilight Flamecaller and like Keeper of Oldemon kind of does it. It's a weird case when it first started, right? But clearly by now we know that Blizzard really wants Paladins to be able to make things into 3/3s. I don't know.
That's true. That 3/3 is the magic number.
It's the magic number for Paladin now. I don't know why, but okay, whatever. But before that, it only had like Aldors and Humilities and whatever. And all of a sudden, you have this card that can make something into a 3/3. So that was new. But it's still different when you add a body, even a really like high tempoed body like Abyssal Enforcer, on top of something the class is already able to do. Like, that doesn't break the class. It creates a really powerful card, always, it seems like. But it doesn't really change the way you play against the class in a very fundamental way. The way, like, Dark Iron Skulker would, right?
Right. I think that's the best example. So we'll stick with that example. And we have seen basically class cards that have given classes abilities that, number one, like forces you to play against them differently, and number two, gives them an ability sort of that not every class is, quote, supposed to have, right? So we have seen that with class cards like a Dark Iron Skulker, and now
they're still existing. It's not like they're gone, right? Fool's Bane, that's a perfect example of Warrior sucks so much we're gonna just do something like that, right? Like, it's horrible for the Warriors class identity, but it's a really powerful card.
Right. And I will say, in a design perspective, it is very hard to, just stay in your lane, right?
When there's 9 lanes, this is a lot of freaking lanes. Like, if everyone has their own little chunk, you're very, like, split up.
Right. And from expansion to expansion, obviously we're going to have some bleeding in, like from one class to another, and, one class taking sort of the role of another class. But I think one of the main differences with the KFT meta is, instead of class cards sort of driving the convergence, we have neutral cards driving the convergence, which is, number one, due to how powerful the neutral cards are, and number two, the neutral cards are just focusing on buffs, right? They're focusing on the simple snowball that Arena is built upon, right? If you play a minion on 1, play a minion on 2, play a minion on 3, and make good trades, that's been sort of the fundamental win condition of Arena since day one. And the powerful cards build on this principle, build upon this, quote, like, synergy, right? So we see this class convergence because of neutral cards, which is kind of the first time that we've seen it. Like, we've seen powerful neutral cards before in, for example, like Bog Creeper and North Sea Kraken. I kind of miss Kraken in a way. I don't know.
No, because Kraken was like game changing when it came out. Like, I think people who haven't played the Arena before TGT, which is so long ago, like, they don't quite realize just how the Arena completely shifted when Kraken came out. Like, it's just one of those cards. I feel like I tell this story more often than I should, because one, I was really like happy with myself that I was like, Kraken's gonna be great, and everyone was like, Kraken's gonna suck. No 9 mana card is viable. But the idea was, no 9 mana card was viable in the GVG meta that had existed before then. But we're going to change the whole meta now by how the Arena goes. And so 9 mana cards are going to be good. But more than that, it's a very powerful card that changed the entire meta, right? Like, for all classes. It's not like some classes got faster and others got slower. It's like all classes got slower. All classes were, like, the turns went from, like, game 1 by 7 to, like, even before 7, right? GVG was, like, 5 or, like, 2 or whatever. That was, like, the worst part of Hearthstone. And we've shifted it now all the way down to 9, where 9 is almost always a viable play that will change the game.
Yeah, it was crazy. I feel as though this is a story. You're just like, I'm gonna tell my grandkids.
It is. I am gonna tell my grandkids about how I got the North Sea Kraken prediction right against everyone's better judgment.
Good for you, dude. Good for you. I will admit I was a skeptic during that time as well. So this is you can.
This is my war story of card valuations.
There you go. But anyways, so we've had very powerful neutral cards previously, but I think what's different in this meta is just the number of buff cards and sort of the ability to slowly ramp up in terms of the buffs. Anywhere from Akra's Veteran, right, to the new Sun Cleric. I'm forgetting its full name. And then you have like Sunborn Valkyr, you have Bone Mare, and you just trend upwards and powerful cards from early game to mid game to late game.
Every turn. You're like scared of this every turn. Turn 3, turn 5, turn 7. Like
right?
1 mana cards doing it.
And these are all neutral cards. So what's been happening is all of the classes, no matter what you draft, and kind of, these cards fit in a control and aggressive style as well. So all classes are using these, and it ends up being, you're facing a paladin, and then you're facing a priest, and you're facing a hunter. And yeah, there'll be differences. Obviously, there's differences in class cards as well, but the games feel a lot more similar,
Yep.
right? And a lot more times games are won by neutral cards. Like a bigger percentage of the game is influenced by neutral cards rather than class cards as well. And that's kind of, I mean, not only is it taking away from sort of the fun factor of facing different classes, it's also in a design perspective, just not where you want to go, right? You have 9 classes for a reason. But that seems to be what we're seeing these days. Like whenever I lose a higher percent of the time, I'm like, oh, I lost to the Bone Mare after the Sunborn Valkyr. I'm not saying, oh, I lost to True Silver after the Spike Ridge
dragon. That dragon, if it hits the right target at the right time, you're screwed. Okay.
You're talking about Cobalt Scalebane.
Cobalt Scalebane, yes.
Yes.
That's my that's that dragon. And Bone Drake is those 2 dragons, or possibly an infinite amount of dragons.
We need an index for this. We need
it's getting harder to like remember all the names of all the cards. I don't know. Maybe I'm just getting older. Maybe you're seeing in like real like live time like how I'm actually aging and my brain is deteriorating.
So, ADWCTA, let me ask. It seems like you agree that there is this convergence.
Yes.
How big of a problem do you think this is?
So convergence definitely happening, right? It happened a bit in Un'Goro. This isn't like the neutral thing happened in Un'Goro because, right, the themes get really pronounced when you change Arena to standard, add a whole bunch of stuff, add a huge offering bonus, and then there's a theme in Un'Goro, right? It's poisonous, it's taunt, it's primordial drakes. But it wasn't that bad because they're separate themes. If you're talking about taunts, there's like 3 like neutral taunts that were introduced that were good, maybe 2. Like if you're talking about poisonous, there were 2 good poisonous minis that were introduced that were neutral. If you're talking about things that like clear the board from off the board, it was really just like Charged Devilsaur and Primordial Drake, and they were both epics. So you didn't have like one theme that just dominated all the neutrals. So in that case, there was convergence into this playstyle. Like, Un'Goro had a very distinctive playstyle that was very swingy and gave a lot of power to people for being off the board and for stalling. And so you had things like Mage being, like, super powerful and all that. And the only reason Paladin was even powerful in Un'Goro was because they had insane cards. If they weren't for their insane actual cards, they would have been pretty bad, actually, in Un'Goro. So, that already happened. But in KFT, almost like Bone Drake aside, all the other powerful cards that are neutral are buffs. All of them. So there's this like, imagine like 4 times the effect that you would normally have in one particular theme. And that really, like Merp said, right, that dominates it. So convergence has happened in the arena. And I also want to point out that this whole like class versus neutral thing, it is a new thing, but that's just an arena thing, right? Like, if you're thinking about it from even a little bit of a constructive perspective, it's not that big of a deal, because you can just put in all the cards that you want to go to whatever deck you want that's the plan of constructed. In the arena, you don't really get to put 2 Flame Strikes in your deck, right? It's not your choice. So these offering odds matter a lot to what decks you see, and so all the decks you see now are kind of the same, because all the good cards kind of do the same thing, and because they all kind of do the same thing, you're all incentivized to make the same kind of deck. Because that's the deck that all your neutral cards are going to support, and all these neutral cards are good and have an offering bonus on top of it. So this is the big picture view of why everything's kind of looking a little bit more the same. And as Merps, I think, hinted, we haven't talked about this beforehand, but I think he knows where I'm going with this. I love it. When my problem with class convergence as a concept, and I've talked against it, every time an expansion comes out, you'll see me like generally make like, the class hasn't done that before, you don't want that. Like, I like classes to stay in their lane, right? Like, first off, because you have 9 classes, you want it to be different. I love diversity. I love playing all classes evenly. I want them to be balanced and in their lane. Hard thing to do for Blizzard, but, you know, it's pretty easy to make them stay in their lane. It's harder to balance that. But still, the way to balance a class is not to make them go out of their lane, right? Like Fool's Bane, I thought was when it came out, I thought it was an awful card for Warrior. It was the best card for Warrior, but it was awful from a design perspective.
Right.
Like you're not making the Warrior seem more warrior-y. You're trying to fill in some like weakness that you should really just go with and say, yeah, Warriors can't deal with that. And same for, well, Diachronic Skulker was just silly because Rogue was already like one of the best classes, if not the best class. Okay. Anyway, but the reason I'm okay with neutral convergence, so to speak, is because it's not actually converging any of the classes. The classes actually all have their own distinctive flavors in KFT. You have your freezes for your stalls for your mage, your freezes, buffing thing, like not buffing freezes. Well, there's one freeze that also buffs, but I mean like an increase in the number of freeze cards, dramatic increase in the number of freeze cards for Shaman, which hasn't really come together in the arena, and we never expected it to, but it is a direction. You have your druids now with like the resurgence of taunt, which kind of was left behind at some point. You have your warriors with a lot of like pings again. Like everybody's like doing its own kind of like thing still, right? They're just not very good. Like the class cards in general in KFT are not all that great, especially when you compare with like Ongoro, right? And the neutral cards are so good. So the classes still maintain their distinct little flavors, but they're maintaining their flavors on a base that's becoming more and more important. And when the base is more important, it seems like imagine you used to be playing against like an MSG, for example. That was like, I think, the height of class divergence. And it's also in many ways, like, at least I keep bringing it up as like the most balanced meta. Because it was really a point at which I think Blizzard hit the like balancing area right before they went to standard and added all these bonuses, and now they're trying to refigure it out. But in the MSG meta, you had your hand buff classes that did hand buffy things. You had your Jade classes that didn't really do Jade things, but were like kind of like the normal classes. And then you had your potion classes, which were all very high card advantage and all had huge explosive potions that cleared the board. And then on top of that, each of those classes had their own wrinkle, right? Priest with the healing and whatever, mage with the warlock, right? All the stuff. It was very different. Every time you faced one class, you had to completely change the way you approached it. If you faced all the classes in a remotely similar fashion, you would have like a not terribly great win rate. Like assuming you're like a 5-win player normally, like it becomes really a big deal to play against your class. And in their general archetypes, not even in their like minor things, not even like, oh, I have to watch out for this card because I'm facing this class, but what's my game plan? What's their game plan? Now everyone's game plan is to get on the board. Everyone's game plan is to buff the board. So it's a lot easier from a player's perspective to face down all the classes. You just have to watch out for the little things, the nuances that each class add to their game. But overall, just get on the board, try to get on the board. And if you're better at it than your opponent, you will win more. Like, my win rate's really good in KFT compared to Ongoro. Well, compared to pre-Frost Festival Ongoro. Part of it is because Frost Festival brought a lot of new players in, and they're still in and trying to figure things out. Part of it is the beginning of an expansion is always easier. But also a lot of it is I feel very comfortable in KFT with old cards. Because all the old cards are coming back together now. This is why we raised Yeti when we went into KFT. For the first time. This is literally the first time we have ever raised Yeti in tier list. It's always gone down every expansion because they keep making new cards that are good, that do weird things, that cause swings. And Yeti, it gets weaker the more you can swing. But this time, we raised Yeti. And we did it like with the idea that, that's how this game is going to be played now. It's a little bit more curve-stony, but more important than that, what Yeti stands for, which is getting a solid body on the board that you can work with later, is a really important concept right now in the arena for everybody, for all classes. So I like that, right? Going back to the whole thing of Merps not liking it because he likes the different feel of facing like dramatically different opponents, to me saying, I want to face similar opponents. I want it to be like 75% the same, 25% different. Not like 50-50, or like if we're talking about MSG, like 25% the same, 75% different.
Right. I will say, I think doing it this way, I'll call it the KFT way, as opposed to the Dark Iron Skulker way, right? I would say that this way is a bit healthier, just because you can sort of pass it off as just, oh, this is KFT meta, right? And then when the next expansion hits,
right,
sort of, it's going to be a completely different feel, right? It won't be the quote buff meta anymore, because you're knocking down the offering rate, and then you're driving up the offering rate of the new expansion, also introducing new cards along with new class cards. So I do think this is healthier for the meta overall in the year or two that we'll be seeing these cards. We're just seeing a concentrated version of one expansion, as opposed to giving a class a kind of a broken, sort of out of its lane card that it'll have for a long time, and it changes the way that you play against that class for all the expansions to come, right? So I think that's where we're at. This is something in which it's here, and it's definitely prevalent. It's just a matter of, well, do you enjoy it or not? We don't have much of a choice, right? Like I don't enjoy it that much. You think it's fine. No matter what, though, it will change by next expansion.
Yes.
And just realize that the differences that you saw in MSG and then once again in Ungoro, it's lessened to a severe extent, right? Now it's just a lot of Acros veterans, a lot of Cobalt Scalebanes, Bone Mares, Sunborn Valkyrs. Those are cards that you want to look out for, sometimes more than class cards, because some classes didn't get very good cards. Mage, for example.
I feel like most classes didn't get very good cards in KFT.
I think that's fair, yeah. And a lot of times you're going to find that, you're fearing the neutral cards, and they cause you the loss or give you the win more often than class cards.
And what's great about giving you the win with neutral cards is you can carry that from class to class too. Like in the same way where in MSG you had to have a whole different strategy for each class. Now you can have the same strategy for every class and just alter 25% of it. It's like it may be a more boring meta. I don't care too much about boring. I think that's kind of like one of the differences.
You've never cared about that.
Yeah, like for me, what's fun is not like big things are happening or whatever. What's fun is like eking out the edge and getting the higher win rate. And the more normal things are, the more you can focus on improving that area rather than like getting really good with one class at the expense of the others, or having to like spend a lot more time to master all the classes. So here it's I think it's a really good time to learn the game. Like we normally don't get to this stage of like, oh, it's a really good time to learn the game until later on in the meta when it's stabilized, but the meta's already stable. It's very stable right now. Like no one's doing new crazy things. The way the offering rates are set up encourage a stable meta. Now that the synergy picks have mostly just become a nuisance rather than like a crippling like design flaw in the arena, you can kind of like just hedge against it and get on with your lives. And so I think it's really a good time to learn, especially if you're branching out into a different class, because again, you want to branch out into a different class when it's 75% the same. You don't want to branch out into a different class when it's 25% the same and you have to learn a whole new thing from scratch. Like, what is the Warlock's win condition? Right now, it's like, yeah, Warlocks are like mages, only you got to be a little more like conservative with your initiative because you don't have a ping, and you got to value your board a little more because that's how you get more cards later. That's it. Oh, and then there's this one card called Defile that you have to set up for every now and then, especially if you're behind. That's it. That's Warlock. That's how Warlock is different than Mage. That's pretty crazy, right? Like, I can sum up the difference between Warlock and Mage that easily. Like, you could not do that in MSG, even though they were in the same, like, Kazakus, like, potion category.
Yeah, they played very differently in previous metas. And here, a lot of classes are quite similar, right? And also, you see a lot of classes, or not classes, but sorry, a lot of decks that can be defined as sort of mid-rangey, right? You see a higher percentage of like mid-range decks now, which further just equates to similar games from sort of similar play styles. I
remember creating a mage deck and being like, oh, this is like not that good of a deck, but it's okay. We're gonna lose to any kind of value deck, and we're gonna lose to any kind of aggro deck, but we'll do okay probably with the mid-rangey deck. And I had a preconception of how good mid-range decks are. And then we lost like 3 times in a row to mid-range decks because they were better at mid-range than we were. Because we had a pretty like kind of deck. And And that's what's happening. Mid-range decks are very powerful. Like, I'm loving, like, Hunter. I've been playing, like, a lot more Hunter than I used to, because mid-range Hunter is back, like, very much on the rise compared to aggro Hunter. And that's where I like to play my Hunter a little more. 25% Hunter, 75% neutral class. Rather than 75% we're going face because we're Hunter. Duh.
And if you go face, this is just, if you go face, you want as many class cards as possible. That's basically
yeah. Oh yeah.
Right. Because class cards usually have like half a mana to sometimes 1 mana's worth of extra tempo, which is what you need. And those add up significantly.
Although that's no longer true with the new cards. Like since Ungoro, they've just been like, neutral cards are class cards.
Yeah. And class cards are weird.
Yeah.
That's how they've done it. It's like neutral cards can give you the tempo / card advantage that class cards can give you. It's just class cards do really specialized things now, which is fine to some extent. It just, in the arena especially, a lot of it's about power.
Yeah.
So that's where it's at right now. Like ADWCTA says, get into the arena, learn a new class, and just keep on picking those Bone Mares and Cobalt Scalebanes. And it's a good time to ease into another class that you've traditionally not been comfortable with.
And it's a good time for like the very fundamentals of fundamentals, right? Like this is a less of a time for like, do I go face or not? Like, do I take that risk or not? Which it used to be like pretty heavy, especially in like Ungoro. I thought it was like a really heavy, like you have to figure stuff out. Like you may just choose to lose the board or you may need to push the board. Now it's like mostly you're just kind of in charge of clearing your opponent's board. And so it's a more basic level of skill, but it's a good time to like buff those skills up. And then you can work in your other more high level skills at the pace that you want to without like having to suffer a lot of losses in the middle.
Yep. All right. So I think that's enough about sort of class convergence. Let's move on to what I really want to talk about.
Yeah, after a half hour of this podcast, we can now talk about what we're really supposed to talk about.
People were complaining about Death Knights.
Yeah.
Anyways, Death Knights, guys. Let me, for those of you who don't look at Reddit every single day, or just sort of keep up with all the latest Hearthstone news, let me tell you sort of a short timeline of what's been happening. About a week and a half ago, Crip released this video that says hero cards don't belong in Arena, right? And it was basically just Crip expressing his opinion that the Death Knight cards are just too much value and too powerful, and they're problematic in a format like Arena, in which if a one card is just packs that much value and is that dominant and doesn't need other cards to synergize with it, it sort of is in its own tier in the arena, right? He also points out, and I think this is very fair, that there are 2 classes that get Death Knights as their synergy picks. That would be Mage with Frost Lich Jaina, and also Warlock with, what is it?
Gul'dan.
Something Gul'dan. Yeah, it's something Gul'dan. I forget what it is. You're right, there are too many names now. But I think that is
Blood Reaver Gul'dan.
Blood Reaver Gul'dan, right? So those 2 classes see a much higher percent of their legendaries.
Literally double.
Yeah, because those are known as synergy cards, and if you get a legendary in one of your first 2 picks, which is pretty high actually, those are very likely to show up.
Yep. Of your legendary cards, a third of them will come from your first 2 picks.
Right.
Because the first pick is guaranteed to be at least rare.
Yeah. Crip came out with this video, and I think, a lot of people agreed. And a few days later, there was this huge post on the Hearthstone, main subreddit that said, please remove Death Knights from Arena. This got a ton of upvotes. There was a lot of conversation, and basically a lot of people supported the idea that these are just supremely powerful cards. And the first sentence in this post says, they polarize winning and losing to almost 100%, which might be a little bit of hyperbole.
To make my opponents win from 20% to 30%?
simmer down. So look, this is something that people obviously feel very strongly about, and it wasn't this post. We've seen sort of this sentiment for
this is not a new thing. Crypt wasn't like driving this from nothing. Like Death Knights were an issue when they first came out. There was already discontent. Discontent. But it was like, oh, people, they're still legendaries. So people are like, oh, they're bad. Let's see if we can do something about it. And I think it's been a month since the release, and we're coming to the point where they're like, yeah, we can't do anything about it. Like, they just win the games. This is stupid. And they also, actually, with Blizzard's changes to the synergies, part of it was adding these Death Knights into the synergy pool. So they like made the problem like quote unquote worse by just showing more Death Knights.
Right. So also with this idea that Death Knights are really powerful, people also point to statistics from HS Replay and Hearth Arena.
They have very high win rates, right?
Very, very high win rates. I don't have the exact numbers here, but
by high, I mean like 60%. Like 60% is a very high win rate for a card.
Right. And then they point to those, and it got to a point where people believe it's like you just can't win against these cards. It's
like they play it, they win.
Right. They play it, they win. It's like I have to be so ahead, and that or otherwise, if I'm just very, very ahead, they win. And ADWCTA, you actually posted in the thread. I know you're very strong.
I posted in the thread. Here's the thing. Here's the difference. And I want to make this difference very clear. The difference between like the synergy picks thread, in which like every single super highly upvoted comment was about how crappy the synergy picks were and how horrible the arena was, and then the developers' responses, right? Those were like your top like 15 highest voted upvoted like comments. The top 3 to 4 highest voted comments, I forget what it is right now, but at least when I was looking at it, to this thread was, no, you're wrong.
That is true.
So, and this one got like, 1,000 something upvotes. Like, so I think this is like an actual like discussion in the community, not like, no, we all agree this synergy pick thing is crap the way you've implemented it. This is more like a lot of people feel like these cards are really powerful and bad. A lot of other people don't see it as much of a problem or a problem at all, some people. And I tend to find myself, I wrote a post about it because I feel like I should defend Death Knights. Also because, like, it's really just, I'll explain. One, Death Knights are super powerful. We have them in the tier list, right? And someone else actually categorized all the tier list rankings from our tier list and Hearth Arena about, like, where Death Knights fall. And we had them higher than they did apparently initially to start, but then they've updated theirs to make it even higher because they're about win rates, right? And the average player is losing a lot of games to Death Knights, and Death Knights are helping you win a lot of games. So they've moved them up even higher now. But we've held steady because it's matched our expectations almost like exactly. What are some Death Knights that just give you an idea of the value? Malfurion's a 143. Which is below Druid of the Swarm, around where Naturalize is, around where Wrath is, around where Swipe is, way below Ultimate Infestation. Okay, Deathstalker Rexxar is basically the best Hunter card. It's around where Eaglehorn Bow is. And Merps will disagree with you with the tier list on that. But if you play a normal mid-rangey game, that's where Deathstalker Rexxar will be. Frostledge Jaina is a 142. We raised that. Because we weren't properly accounting for elemental synergies before with like other elementals. We were only accounting for it with water elementals, which was obviously not how the card worked. So it actually got a significant amount of points, but it's still only a 142. That's like a fireball, it's like a polymorph. Yeah, what else is around here? Frostbolt's even higher than that now. We're really high on Frostbolt in this meta. Primordial Glyph is higher than that. Meteor's higher than that. Flamestrike is a bit higher than that. So it's around like Firelance Portal, Fireball, Polymorph. So, good, but again, not like game-breakingly so. Uther, the Edom Blade, 183, very good, around where True Silver is, a little below Aldor, beats most of the other cards. Really quickly, Shadow Reaper Anduin, 141. Valera is a 122, because she kind of sucks. But still, Death Knight, still pretty powerful. And Shaman also kind of sucks. A Thrall is 124. And Blood Reaver Gul'dan is a 148, which sounds like it's on par with the other Death Knights, but Warlock cards generally have lower scores, so it's actually one of the best Warlock cards. Like your Defile and your Despicable Dreadlord are higher than that, but that's pretty much it. And finally, Warrior Scourgelord Garrosh, which we might actually be moving up. This is the next candidate to be moved up. It's a 148 right now. But again, these cards are generally lower than things like Bone Mare and like Lich King and like Deathwing and a lot of their other class cards, right? Yeah. Primordial Drake, Bone Mare should all be around, if not higher than where they are, unless you're talking about Gul'dan or Rexxar.
So let me ask you, it seems like there is this one camp that is basically screaming, Death Knights are OP, please remove them. And
they're backed up by statistics.
Right. And we have this other camp that is saying, like, look, let's not overreact. They are powerful, but it's not that serious.
They're not in a tier by itself, right?
Right.
Like to take Crip's idea, which I think is fair. If something isn't a tier by itself, you should really look at it like a bit more. And I would very strongly argue that they're not in a tier by itself, and they're not in a tier by itself because one, other legendaries are better. Like, okay, let's break down a Death Knight. Just break down Death Knight. It does three things. It anti-tempos you by a little bit. It does its move, like its battle cry move on the board, right? Which is like over.
They always have some sort of initiative, or impact the board in some way.
Yeah. And each Death Knight is different, but the only Death Knight, okay, so Priest technically can get a positive tempo swing with the thing if they have a lot of like really high attack minions, which probably you won't get a situation where they have a lot of those. But there is potential for it. You're usually happy to just use it on one. If you get two, you're super happy. And Warlock, if you have a lot of demons, which you're very unlikely to get actually. There's not that many demons right now in the Warlock's arsenal. But if you do have a lot of demons that have died, you can get your mana's worth of demons on it. But generally speaking, like more than 75% of the time, they're both anti-tempo as well. Everything else actually is anti-tempo. You get 5 armor, which makes a difference, but it's not like the end of the world. Ultimate Infestation also gets you 5 armor. And one more point, Ultimate Infestation is a 220 something. Like, it is rated significantly higher than all these Death Knights, because it will win you games a lot more than all these Death Knights for a good player, we think. It is the same thing, right? It gains 5 armor. And then it has a hero power, which has whatever effect. But what I want to note is basically what's happened here is that you have lost like 2 points of tempo on average. You have gained 5 health with your tempo loss. And then every turn after that, depending on which class you're using, you are recovering the tempo that you have lost. Or not at all. Or you just permanently lose the tempo. Like Druid, for example, the hero power starts dealing 3 damage for 2 mana. Does that really give him tempo? That's the same as a Wrath, right? That's the same as a Wrath, but you also take damage to your hero. So it kind of gives them tempo in the sense that it's more tempo than what you normally get for 2 mana, but it's the same tempo as a good card. So tempo-wise, it gets like a tiny bit of its tempo back every turn, but like less than 1 mana's worth of its tempo back every turn. So it will take how many turns of consecutively using the hero power to actually get your tempo back? Something like 4 for the for Malfurion. Something like 4 turns. And that's not the turn, that's not counting the turn you play it in. So from the turn that you play the Death Knight, you have 5 turns. And that's also assuming that he doesn't die or that he doesn't have to heal with his hero power. So the question is, now your opponent has anti-tempoed. Can you kill him in 5 turns? Now, if the answer is yes, then he has really hurt himself by playing the Death Knight, because he's gained a bunch of card advantage for no reason, because he's going to lose. If the answer is no, then starting from the 5th turn, he has just recovered the correct amount of tempo. That's a long time in the game that it will take for him to actually recover the tempo that he's lost. Like, arena games go for what, like 10, 12, 15 turns at most? Like, to have to wait 5 turns to recover your tempo is ridiculous. Now, there's a reason these cards are very good, and that's because you're getting so much free card advantage, right? That's not, you can't argue with that. all these cards just get insane card advantage. And again, I'm picking Malfurion because Malfurion is one of those cases where you actually do get your tempo back. Malfurion and Gul'dan. If you're something like Rexxar, you don't get your tempo back. You know, if you're something like Garrosh, depending on how your opponent sets up the board, you're probably not getting your tempo back. But generally, Death Knights get their tempo back somewhere around like 3-ish turns afterwards. So that's 4 turns total. And after that, it's like you may get even more tempo, but generally speaking, tempo-wise, it's 4 turns. Card advantage-wise, they're just going to get card advantage. That's going to happen. That's why Crip is saying, like, oh, it fundamentally changes everything. Because, yeah, you're not going to win the card advantage battle against the Death Knight. You're not. They played a Death Knight. If they played an Ultimate Infestation, you're not going to, like, out-card advantage them at that point.
Right. Let me ask you then, like, what is causing the divide between the two?
What's causing the divide is people have different play styles. If you don't know how to go face and you're not set up to take advantage of your opponent playing a Death Knight, you will lose. Because once your opponent plays a Death Knight, you don't win the long game. You almost never win the long game. And if you're a player that's like, I'm going to keep trading on the board and I'm going to like set up everything, I'm going to eventually win because my opponents will have almost no cards and I'll have like 2 or 3 more cards than him.
Yep.
But you're going to lose when they play a Death Knight because that's your strategy. And they have countered your strategy with the card. In the same way, where if your strategy is, I'm going to put a lot of small things on the board and hit his face, and they play a Primordial Drake, you're going to lose. You're just going to lose. It's the same thing. That's why the Death Knights are all ranked around where Primordial Drake is. There's a reason for all of these. And again, we don't rank these things in our heads like and say like, oh, we think it's 143 points. This is all technically done by the algorithm at this point. And the algorithm is actually looking at all the board states, all the possibilities, and it is making what I think, and how many times you get to use that hero power after you play it, when you're going to play it, what your loss conditions are, and your win conditions are. It's actually doing all that when it comes to board states, at least. And it's saying, I think very correctly, that, you know what? Under your normal expectations, these cards are not that great because they're only really great in a certain small subset of situations you're going to be in. They're not good in all the other sets. Like, frankly, just not a good card. We're not talking about, like, you know, they're like a 110 or whatever the average card would be in our tier list. We're saying they're like an 80 or like probably like more like a 90. Like, they're actually a below average card most of the time. Now, in the times in which they're good, they're literally game winning, which is what people feel a lot. But people feel that a lot because they keep putting themselves in that situation. And you know what that situation is in KFT, generally speaking? It's called losing. Like, if you're losing and your opponent plays a Death Knight, you have lost.
Yes, it completely it shuts the door, right? Any chance you had before, it completely just shuts the door and you say, no, like, you are definitely not winning this game.
Yep.
And in games in which you are close, like, you know, both have like 2 minions on the board and both have like, you know, 1 or 2 cards in hand, and you're just sort of like, like small advantage here, small advantage there. Whoever plays the Death Knight wins, right? That is...
No, they win the long game. They potentially lose the tempo game. I totally disagree that in close situations, whoever plays the Deathwing wins.
No.
I mean, whoever plays the Death Knight
the game is like continuing on, right? Like, it's going to go on for a while. But I've had this situation. So this has happened multiple times when I've streamed as well. I've had someone come into the chat and say, Merps, I really hate Death Knights. And I asked them why, and they're just like, I was in a dominant situation. They played Death Knight X, right? Like, insert Death Knight here. And I, like, handedly lost.
That's
and my
not
response
possible.
every time, right? And every time, I'm just like, then you weren't winning. Like, then you weren't dominantly winning, right? Then maybe you were up by a minion, right? Something like that.
If you were actually like up by a minion compared to your opponent's board, and then your opponent plays this and anti-temples himself by 2, you really should be able to win that game.
I've actually tracked the number of times I have seen Frostlich Jaina, and my record against her is 4-1, because every single time they've played her,
I'm 3-1.
Yeah, I have gone. There was one game in which it was very close. It was very close. And you know, they played Frostlich Jaina, and I was like, I lost. Gains too much health. That's it. But in other games, and I think 2 of them, they like played Frostless Jane to just show, hey, I have this card.
Yeah.
Kill me. I'm like, okay, sure. And if you think about those situations, and also the situations that they never even make it to turn 9.
Right. Or they just don't play the card because the card doesn't help. That's the point, that there are so many situations in which this card does nothing. That's why you don't even play it. Like, you have beaten Frostless Jaina way more than you think you have. Everyone listening to this who has been playing Hearthstone in KFT.
I think that's a very important message. Like, you have beaten Deathwing a lot more than you think you have. You have beaten Frostless Jaina so many times that you are not aware of. Just because you have killed them before turn 9 or gotten them in a situation by turn 9, turn 10, they can't play it. Otherwise, they die, right? So,
and some people will show it to you anyway before they die to be like, I have this card, and other people just won't. They'll just concede.
Right. So I think that's very important. Like the fact that, you know, there's this huge uproar from the community, but when you really look at it, it's like, you know, these aren't game-changing cards, right? It's nothing we've seen before. If you think Death Knights are problematic, you have to also think that like,
so many cards are problematic.
Deathwing is problematic, right?
He said in the post, I don't disagree that Death Knights are problematic. I don't like anything that closes out a way of winning, right? And that's exactly what Death Knights do. But before you get rid of Death Knights, get rid of Primordial Drake.
Yeah.
Get rid of Deathwing. Those are actually worse. Like, in terms of, like, its effect on the game, and in terms of its ability to swing the game, than any of the Death Knights outside of, like... Well, they're probably on par with, like, Rexar, which is the highest example of a card that just shuts out a game. Because you literally get infinite card advantage. That is a whole ton of cards. So it just shuts out any way that your opponent has of winning besides, like, tempo and going to your face, right? So, like, I would say probably around the same area. But generally speaking, it's just so many cards you would get rid of before you get to Death Knights.
Yeah. So that's kind of where we're at right now. And one of the problems I see with this community uproar is it takes away from other things that Blizzard, I think, should be focusing on. And what scares me is that Blizzard does respond to huge community outcries, right?
Oh, yeah? Death Knights are going to be out of the arena?
I don't know.
Well, here's the thing, though, and like we said before, if you are, like, a casual player, probably shares that feeling about Death Knights. And, you know, Crypt makes a video about that, nothing really about synergies, and he's going to reach a lot of people. And what's going to happen is they're still tweaking synergies little by little, and they're going to take Death Knights out of the arena. And I don't really care if Death Knights are in the arena or not. I really don't. It's just, we'll see what Blizzard's response to this is. But they're, like, Death Knights actually feel more for on Blizzard's side, in the sense that if so many people are not having fun in the arena because they're facing Death Knights, fine, let's just get rid of them, right? Like, I don't think the arena is going to be significantly negatively impacted by losing Death Knights. I think it'll be positive for the arena. So I'm totally on board with this. What I want to talk about was the philosophy of how Death Knights are created, what they actually do, and why I don't think they're that much of a problem compared to other cards. But more importantly than that is what I'm going to get to right now, and what we've been hinting at throughout this whole discussion, which is, how do you beat a Death Knight? How do you go, like Merps, 4-1 against Frostless Jaina when you're currently 1-3, or whatever stats would say about that?
All right. So, look, one of the things that... How you beat a Death Knight is, first of all, don't think about the Death Knight. Just think about, how do I lock up the game as fast as possible, right? What is my best play every single turn? Which is what you should be thinking about.
Before you even get to that point, let's set up the actual board first before the Death Knight is played.
Sure.
Let's say there's 3 situations that Death Knight is played. 1, you're behind, you lose, done. You're locked out.
Done. Yep,
no need to talk about it. You're probably going to lose anyway. You probably only have like a 20-25% chance to win anyway. It just doesn't exist anymore. Big whoop.
Right.
They played a really powerful card designed to do exactly that, and they did it, right?
They could have played like a Sunborn Valkyrie.
Yeah, the same thing, right? Or like you could have had a board and they could have played a Primordial Drake or a Flame Strike or something, right? Like Abyssal Enforcer. Like, these cards all exist in the arena. It's fine. Like, this is nowhere near the level of problematicness that is like Fiery War Axe or like even potentially a Vicious Fledgling if you don't care about the RNG. Like, they just win you the game from very early on, and there's nothing you can do about it unless you can, and then they're fine. Okay. So the second state is you're kind of even on the board, and we'll talk a lot about that. The third state is what I want to talk about right now and just close the loop. If you are ahead on the board, like actually ahead, like you have, let's say this is the 10 mana turn, and you have 12 mana's worth of minions on the board, and your opponent has nothing on the board, and your opponent needs to put stuff on the board. That's what being ahead is. It's
like dominantly ahead.
Yeah, well, it's just that like you have whatever mana it is on the board, and you've taken care of your opponent's board, right? Like you have 10 mana's worth of stuff because you have 10 mana to work with, and you had an open board to begin with, or you had some stuff and he had some stuff, and you used your stuff to remove his stuff, and then you played other stuff. But anyway, your board adds up to 10 mana, his board adds up to 0, or you have a net plus 10 mana advantage. That's what being ahead is. So the goal is, of course, to always be ahead so that your opponent has to play catch-up, right? Your opponent has 10 mana, they can clear your board, they can set up again, but you are the one making the push. Your opponent has to respond to you every single turn. It's not like, oh, I have a Yeti, he has a Croc, let's go. This is the 10 mana turn. No, it's a 10 mana turn, you're up by 2 mana. That's not being ahead. That's being very slightly ahead. So if you're actually ahead by 10 mana, as you should be if you're a good player in most of your games, you win. The Death Knights do nothing. Unless you're set up in a way in which it's against Rexxar and he consecrates you and you can't deal with the consecrate. But generally speaking, you win. Like even someone like Garrosh, for example, like only deals 4 damage to stuff. It's not the end of the world. You're still gonna win that. And he'll take damage to his face. So, setting that aside, we are now in the middle scenario, right? So Death Knight's worthless in scenarios in which you're winning, totally dominant in situations in which you're losing. If you're a good player, you should be in the winning percent 50% of the time, and in the totally losing scenario, like maybe like 12% of the time. And then you have like your 37% of the time left. What do you do in a situation in which you're either slightly up or slightly down or, you know, something?
Sure. So have they played the Death Knight yet?
Like they just played the Death Knight. Or okay, do you want to talk about how to set up? Well, but you can't really like prepare against the Death Knight. So just when they play it, that's when you know what's up.
Right. So the Death Knights are all a little bit different, obviously, right? And their capabilities. But the main thing is once they have played a Death Knight, all of the Death Knights provide tremendous value. So you know you're on a clock immediately. Like as soon as they play a Death Knight, sort of no matter if you're a little bit ahead or a little bit behind, suddenly a timer should start in your head, and you should know it's like, oh man, like every single turn I'm going to lose out on this much value, or you know, this much tempo / value.
You're going to lose out on a tiny bit of tempo, even in the best of the Death Knight scenarios, and you're going to lose out on a lot of card advantage.
Yes. So you know it's like, all right, I have to end the game in 3 turns, or that's putting out an example, right? So the math changes.
I need to jump in here. You don't need to end the game in 3 turns. If you end the game in 3 turns, you're definitely okay. But
that's fine.
Remember, 3 turns after the turn that they play the Death Knight is approximately how long it'll take for them to get the tempo back. So that's as if they had never played the Death Knight tempo-wise. They were just playing regular, you know, cards that they would have in their deck. So up until 3 turns, your opponent is literally playing at a disadvantage compared to if they had not played the Death Knight. That is your window, not where you're okay, but in which your opponent has just shown an actual significant weakness. They have hurt themselves.
Yeah. And obviously we're not talking about like a situation where Anduin kills off like 2 huge minions.
Yeah, right.
Your board or anything.
Like Anduin and Gul'dan have situational cases, and also Rexxar to some extent have situational cases in which they can get a ton of value.
Right. But I think this is important to establish. Like, just you are on a timer, right? You can't play the same way in which you might have wanted to play before. It's like, all right, I'm top decking, they're top decking, or like, you know, I'm playing.
No, like, if you're both top decking, you need to go now.
Yeah, exactly. Or it's like, I'm going to play card for card, value for value, and eke out a small advantage every single turn. Right? That's over. That's done. They're
literally getting 3 mana's worth of card advantage every single turn. Like, that's crazy, insane amounts of card advantage.
Yes. So by them playing Death Knight, it forces you to change your plan, and it forces you to reevaluate, for example, trades, right? Maybe this trade is not as advantageous as before, and you just need to go face. So it definitely changes those considerations now.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not like pointlessly smork, because like I said, you actually have quite a large amount of turns before they get the tempo back. Once they get the tempo back, it's kind of over, unless you're just finishing them off with like pure reach. Because once they get the tempo back, they're going to have all the card advantage and even more additional tempo every turn. Right? Like, this is, you're not going to win that battle. But you do get a number of turns before they break even, and then you still have a couple more turns after that where they have like a tiny tempo advantage. So what, right? Like, pretend that they like use the rogue coin card, right, for 2 turns. Like, 1 rogue coin card over the course of 2 turns. That's how much extra tempo they're going to get on your 4th and 5th turns. That's really not the end of the world. So that's how you should think about it tempo-wise. Card advantage-wise, you should think of it this way. How many cards do I have in my hand right now? How many cards am I going to draw every turn? When will I run out of cards? Because you should no longer think, will I run out of cards before they run out of cards? That doesn't matter anymore. They have infinite cards now. You should only think, when will I run out of cards? Because that's your timer. Because when you run out of cards, you can't tempo anymore. And then you're dead, right? So you're on 2 timers. One is the timer in which they out-tempo you, which depending on the Death Knight that they play, and depending on the situation that's happening on the board, is different. But assuming that it is a totally equal board, and they have anti-tempo themselves 2 mana, which is the average for the Death Knights, in order to do their thing, then it will take them 3 more turns to get back to even. The second timer is, when will I run out of cards? And that depends on how many cards you have in your hand or whatever. So some decks are set up in a way where they have plenty of cards, and they will draw more cards, and they will be able to hang on for a long time. And it doesn't mean anything, because you have your first timer now on the Death Knight that's going to out-tempo you, right? So other decks are set up in a way where they basically don't have any more cards, and in which case you're on a shorter timer, because you just are on a shorter timer because you don't have cards. That timer doesn't go away just because your opponent played a Death Knight. That timer is always there. It was there before the Death Knight, it's there after the Death Knight. So once you add these two, once you like consider both these 2 timers, and it's separate, right? If either of these timers run out, you lose. So you want to take them and take the shortest timer of these 2 and play based on that timer. And so usually it's like you're going to get a couple turns at least, no matter what situation you're in, as long as you like are fighting for the board in a way that you're not like down. So again, what do Death Knights do? They reward the player who is up. Is that good? Yes, because if you're good, you are up more often than your opponent. So it helps you lock down the victory more often than it actually hurts you. Even if you're like fighting for the board, a good player will know how to take advantage of the weakness of the Death Knight. A bad player will keep doing whatever they were doing before.
Yeah.
And if you are actually down, you lose. And that's not good. That's the bad part of Death Knights. But that happens very infrequently if you're a good player.
Yep. So Death Knights, hopefully Blizzard doesn't expend a lot of energy into this community outcry.
No, I mean, I don't really care. They could just get rid of all the Death Knights. I really don't care. I just needed to make the philosophical point here that Death Knights are not problematic.
I mean, I'm just hoping resources aren't spent.
Yeah, I mean, I hope they're not like thinking about it too hard. Like, I hope they like know what they're doing with their own Death Knights, and they anticipate. Okay, so one, they should have been able to anticipate this response. You have created super powerful legendary cards, given them bonus offering rates all over the place, and they are designed in a way to win you the long game. And Arena is like half about the long game. So they should have really anticipated this response. So they should have been able to, know how to deal with it. I can see like synergy-wise that they just didn't think about things at all. But like these are cards that they had to design and create and all that, right? Like they thought about these. But yeah, so that's Death Knights. And on the other side, right, this is why I actually like Death Knights are going to help my win rates. Not only because my opponents rely on them to like crush noobs and win and get higher win rates, and then I can crush them because I'm ahead, which obviously helps. But if I ever get a Death Knights are really good for me because I'm up usually. And remember what we said, when you're up, like when the player playing the Death Knight is up, they secure the win right there.
Yeah.
So like Death Knights are like a supercharged version of like, I don't know, like a Frostwolf Warlord or something that we can't remove for me. which is nice. And in a worst case scenario, they're still better than a Frostwolf Warlord. So it's pretty good for me. So like I said, right, like I want Death Knights in from a purely like this is good for my win rate perspective. I don't think they're healthy for the game because I don't think anything that locks out a victory condition is healthy for the game. But they're not the most problematic of this in many, many ways. Like so many other cards that have existed since the very beginning of the game are much more problematic. In the same way that these are problematic, but like worse. Like this is not a Death Knight problem. Death Knights do not introduce a new problem.
Yeah. All right. So I think that's enough about Death Knight. Looking forward to the next sort of, pitchfork riot that the community will eventually turn towards. For now, I think it's nice to point out that Death Knights, while maybe causing some anger to some people, are by far, not the most problematic.
And I hope you guys can now beat Death Knights. It's really not that hard. Like, I am so surprised how many people, like, who are otherwise good at the game are struggling with Death Knights. Like, just internalize what the Death Knight actually does, which is not a lot until a few turns later. And then, like, do that. Like, you know what? I bet that the people who are struggling with Death Knights are not good at Hunter. I think it's probably a pretty good ratio, like a pretty good correlation.
I can see that, yeah.
Because if you're good at Hunter and you know what to do, then you know what to do when a Death Knight hits the board. You're like, all right, I'm a Hunter now. That's my only win condition left. Let's do this.
I'm always looking for any excuse to go phase.
Yeah.
Like any class.
Right, exactly. And you should. Like, sometimes this game just, like, forces you to do that, even without it, right? Like, Ultimate Infestation is a pretty good example of, well, I lost the card advantage game.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I've always kind of said, and let me know if you agree, the progression of a player goes from, when you're a complete noob, you go face a lot, right? And then when you're a pretty good player, you make a lot of trades. And then when you get really good, you go face a lot.
Yes. No, I would totally agree.
True, right? It's very true. I tell this to people on the stream, and everyone has a chuckle, and then the SM orcs. But it's very true because like as you get like the 80 to 90% of the time, when you're making those trades, like that's probably correct, right?
But when you're a really good player, you know the times in which you don't need to make those trades, and that's your margin.
Right, yeah. And then that margin, that 2-3 damage, that just increases your win rate so much, right?
Like understanding how to get good efficient trades on the board and how to place minions on the board to make sure you don't let your opponents get good trades is like a mark of a good player. It's the fundamentals of understanding how Hearthstone is played. Understanding when to go face is how the game is really played. Like, that's the way to look at it, because that's actually utilizing like all of the elements that is at your disposal, rather than just the ones that are the most important, which is still trading on the board, like, or knowing how to trade on the board.
Yep. So, anyways, guys, if there's one takeaway, please don't let it be, if I want to get better, I just go face more. That's not really. You have to really understand the trades in order to go face more. But that is actually a progression that you will see. That's the progression that I saw in myself, and I'm sure Adam just wanted himself.
And I also want, like, I know we keep saying, like, oh, be aggressive when the Death Knight hits the board, but that's why I always want to stress, you have 3 more turns until they get back to normal. So, like, when a Death Knight hits the board, it's not like I just go face. I'm still trading. In my mind, though, I'm like, I have a timer. Whenever I make a trade, I'm just setting up a bigger, better, more aggressive board. And I have my timer of when I'm going to start losing my edge. And unless I can keep up the tempo edge by making the good trades against them, by making like tempo plays with my cards or whatever, I'm going to start going face at some point.
All right. So that's Death Knight. I think we talked enough about that. I'm looking forward to not talking about it ever again.
Yes, never again. We will never talk about Death Knights again.
All right. So you want to do question from the GOAT?
Let's do
question
time
for
from
that?
GOAT.
All right, question from the GOAT, which does not involve you at all.
No.
Fantastic.
No, thank you. This is going to be extra insulting when you hear what the question from the GOAT is.
I know. So, question from the GOAT, I've actually gotten a few times on stream. People have asked, like, Merps, what is your advice for someone who is seriously thinking about a leaderboard attempt, right? Like just sort of small min-maxing advice. Obviously, it should be, you know, play.
And today is September 2nd, new leaderboard, new meta, no Frost whatever festival to, like, you know, skew the stats so that your first half of the month is worthless or your second half of the month is worthless. This is back to normal leaderboarding here.
All right, so I think this would be a good time to tell you guys how I planned out my run last month. Also to relive the final days of my glory before the new leaderboard comes out, and, you know, I'm no longer number one, right? Last hurrah, there you go. A few general and maybe a couple of specific things I think people should think about. Number one, and this is for the people who are not doing 100 runs a month, of which there are those people. So if you're only doing like 40 runs, which is still a lot, plan out your runs. Just plan out your runs from the very beginning and saying like, okay, so on September 4th, I plan on doing 1 run. September 5th, I plan on doing 2 runs, and chart out the rest of your month. And then this way, you know, if you're on track, if you're behind a little bit, and you know, can I take a day off? And then also stuff happens, right? Life happens. And you want to make sure that if anything happens, you can move your runs to another day as well. And this all sounds very not fun.
Leaderboards are not fun. We've said this many times.
Yeah.
That's why we don't do it every month.
No, they are not fun. I planned it out and I took a day off in the middle. I thought that was really good. It rejuvenated me, but I only took it off because I knew I could do it. And I only had about like 2 weeks to do all my runs. So it's very important. Anyways, that's number one. Number two, sort of try to game the system, or sort of, you know, play the meta game in a way, in terms of when other people play. It was much easier during something like the Frost Festival, right? In which I identified, well, Wednesdays are a very good day to play because that's when people get their free pass, right? So a lot of people will be playing. It would be good for my record. So I made sure to get like 1 or 2 extra runs on the Wednesdays, of which there were 2. So I think I got 3 runs on one Wednesday and actually 4 runs on another Wednesday, and they did bring up my average, and that was something I tried for. This month, there might not be any of those days.
Like I would go more micro than that. Like me personally, when back in like, I don't know, like February, when I was going for the leaderboard, ended up number 9, not number 1, but I noticed that my weekends, like I averaged literally like 6 wins per run on the weekends, and I averaged 9.5 on weekdays. But I didn't have enough time to not play on weekends because, you know, job, all that other stuff. So I ended up with exactly like 31 runs maybe, and it had a lot of weekend runs in. But if you know that you're better at certain times or others, and for me, it's like I'm more well rested on the weekends. I'm focused more. Like there's no reason why my weekend runs are worse, but it's been like this my entire time playing Hearthstone. From the very beginning, I've always known weekends suck for me. And it's because I think different types of players play over weekends. And I am worse against those types of players, or more likely, because those types of players, when they get to a high win rate, have just more ridiculous decks. And I'm better at playing against good players than playing against good decks. That's my own like evaluation of it. And so in my next leaderboard attempts, I will definitely minimize my weekend play, right? It's the same thing. Yeah. You don't have to, like, that doesn't have to be an event. But if there is, if for example Blizzard all of a sudden says everyone gets a free arena on Sunday, play then.
Play on Sunday if that happens. Yeah. So, try to figure out any sort of soft spots, right, in terms of the meta. Number 3, this is something that is definitely more applicable now rather than from before. But now, especially with the micro adjustments, figure out which classes you are good at.
Yes.
Don't just look at the classes that sort of, the community or, us, like, we say Druid is good, right? If you are not good with Druid, don't play Druid, especially with the micro changes that are coming up. Druid at some point, supposedly,
and you don't know when, and no one will tell you.
Right, but it will be, quote, nerfed,
Yeah.
right? Like, good cards will appear less often for the druid, and for bad classes like warrior, for example, lots of good cards will start popping up.
Yeah, like my
And
warrior win rate in July was pretty good because of the weapon offering bonus and the micro adjusts. I mean,
yeah,
I wouldn't recommend it now. They're again really crappy now, but
so identify a class that you do very well with, and also that you're comfortable playing, right? So in July, I actually played Hunter a lot, and at the beginning, I was kind of unhappy with it. I was like, "Oh, Paladin's really good." I was kind of, quote, forced to play Hunter, and the more I played Hunter, the more I was like, "I'm getting consistently 9+ wins." And by the end of the month, Hunter became my most played class and my highest win rate class. It probably carried me to the #1 spot. And I think part of it was just because I am a significantly better Hunter player compared to the field than I am a Paladin player compared to the field. Right.
And so the Paladin nerfs are going to hurt you, whereas the Hunters, Blizzard's looking at the win rates and being like, that's kind of okay. And you're like, oh, well, I'm going to do better than that.
Right. So, for example, every Eaglehorn bow I draft, I get more out of that bow than other players, right? As opposed to when I draft a Spike Ridge Steed, I get less out of it. And also, I just get less Spike Ridge Steeds in the first place.
Exactly.
So I think that's very important. And, it's a small thing, but at the same time, you're really trying to min-max, right? And I think, what was it? My average was 9.23. Second place was 9.1. It's not that big. Yeah. If I had one bad run.
And you're talking about you at the very top. If you're talking about people who are listening to this podcast going for like, oh, am I going to, I'm going to try to make top 50 or I'm going to try to make top 100 because it goes to 150 now. Like literally 0.1 will move you up like 20 spots.
Yes.
Like that's pretty serious if you're trying to, go for the leaderboard, especially if you're just like, I'm going to go for it this month. You don't try to go for it every month. You want to like get the most out of it.
Yeah, I remember there was this one specific run in which I was actually 2-2 at one point, and the next game I was like pretty close to losing, and I had to sort of just really like focus, dig in, make this weird anti-intuitive play because I just had this read that they had AoE. So I was like, I can't play into this. And then I eventually won, and it required a couple lucky top decks as well. And then I eventually went 12 with it. But if I had lost that one, it would have been a 2-win run instead of a 12-win run. And that's it. I would have lost the #1 ranking because of that, right? That's
because of one run, because of like the lack of like a back-to-back lucky top deck, right? Like, and the same thing happens in many runs, and with whoever #2 is as well, right? Like
the same thing happens. So I guess that gets me to my next point as well. Always play in the proper mindset. I always made sure that, before I played, if I was a little bit sleepy, maybe do something to wake myself up, drink a little bit of coffee, go in fresh. I like to listen to music, or I would put on Netflix reruns, like shows that I've already watched, and I would just watch those, sort of like half watch, right?
Crazy.
I know.
I have complete silence and I stare at the screen.
Like a serial killer.
Like a serial killer, because I'm about to kill every single opponent I face. Exactly like a serial killer. You gotta get in the mindset.
Just get yourself in the mindset that you want, and then play. And if you ever feel yourself getting tired, I take breaks in between. At ADWCTA, we do it very differently as well. Like I also take breaks in between the same run, which you
that destroys a run for me. Like I stop, I start again. It like rarely ends well.
No, I sometimes like to just walk away and then come back, especially after a loss, right? And that's, I think, another really important thing. As soon as you feel the slightest amount of tilt, as soon as you feel any sort of annoyance, just step away. Just go. There is nothing good that comes from it. I have played, even during my run, I have played continued to play after I felt myself getting a little bit tilted. And I stopped doing that after like the 10th run because I felt I wasn't thinking clearly, right? And there were a couple games in which I won, but I was just like, no, I made the wrong read. And like, I don't know why I made the wrong read. or I know why I made the wrong read now, but during that time, I'm just like, no,
because
that was
games ago a primordial drake killed you, and so therefore you have you will face all primordial drakes all the time, and their next top deck will always be a primordial drake.
Right, you could think that, or think the other way. It's like there's no way they can have it again, right? Like,
even though they're totally different people with different decks.
Exactly. So if you are trying to get as high as possible, just make sure you are performing at the highest level that you can. And this also just gives you an advantage over other people, because a lot of other people are actually just like doing other things. They're watching Twitch. They're like, playing with their dog while or running on the treadmill while they're, top decking and killing you, right? So you want to make sure that you are in the proper mindset. And then I talked about this last piece as well, but when you are doing really well, and I think this is very important for like the last 8 runs or so, or the last 5 runs, go like just change the way that you change your risk assessment for the first 5 runs. Like if you're saying I'm starting now, right? For your first, I would say like 5 runs, maybe even 7, 8 runs, like go for broke, swing for the fences, go for those like,
because if you if you whiff, right, and you get like those 2-3 wins, you've just lost 5 runs. That's it. You just make up the 5 runs. You don't actually, it doesn't impact your average. Those will be the first runs to be replaced.
Right. So for those, I would go, especially now with the synergy picks, go for the synergies, right? Like if you want to go for the dragons, go for the dragons. That's fine. If you hit the dragon deck and you get the 12, great. With me, when I was entering like the last, I would say 7 runs, and I was at like 9.3 something, like 9.39. I knew my average was like quite good, and it would be very, very competitive for I thought like a top 5 or top 10 spot, right? But still, I wanted to keep it. I wanted to make sure I didn't kind of like fall to top 30 or something. At that point, I switched to picking classes with less variance, right? So at that point, I wanted to pick like, for example, the rogues, in which I knew it wasn't my best class, but I had the most decisions to make at the beginning.
Like you'll beat all the crappy decks, you'll beat all the crappy players, and so you're gonna get at least 7 wins. And then you may not go 12 as often as your hunter, but
yeah, exactly. Because one of my hunters in there was a 4-win hunter, and I also had a lot of 12s and a lot of 10s. But that 4 stuck out a lot, right? And what I also did was I didn't draft any cards that would lose me the game on the spot.
So Bittertide Hydras.
Bittertide Hydra was very like it was lowered by like 10 to 15 points more from our my internal tiering list. Naga Corsair, no. I did not draft any Naga Corsairs.
No pirates.
Bloodsilk
Corsair, okay, a little.
Or like Bloodsilk Corsair is fine, or I just didn't want to pick it because it's not good. But Bloodsilk Raider, it's fine, because if your 2-drop gets eaten by another 2-drop, it's a huge swing still, because they basically just 3-4. But I've survived that, right? If your 4-drop gets eaten by a 2-drop, that's just way too much, just way too much. And a lot of people, especially early on, keep Galaka Crawler. Like they don't play it, right? They keep it. And it's those that I really want to be afraid of as well. Like those people that keep it. And especially against, if you're facing, there's no better way to say it, a player that's like lower skill than you significantly, it's right for them to keep it. I mean, they don't know that they're facing someone.
But like also keep in mind, if you're going for the leaderboard, like that's just a fact you have to live with, that like almost everyone you face is of lower skill than you. Because you're literally trying to go for one of the top 150 spots in your region. Like, you can't go into the arena and think, like, all people I'm facing are going to be equally skilled as me. Even if you're at 12 wins, your opponent's not going to be as skilled as you, like, 90% of the time.
Yeah. So, like, most of the time when I have had my pirate eaten by Galaka Crawl, for example, it's been in the low wins. And that's actually really dangerous, right? Because you don't want to, like, go down that low, and anything can happen at 2-2, right? Anything can happen at 3-2. the next game, you could just draw poorly, and it doesn't matter how they play. If they draw well, or if they just draw mediocrely and then just play out their stuff, you can lose. And part of getting high on the leaderboard, it's not just the 12 wins. It's avoiding the 3 wins. It's avoiding the 4 wins. So once you have established a good record, kind of tone it down a little bit and just sort of like there was a chance I could have bumped my average up a little bit from 9.23, like kept it at 9.3, right? But I was like, this is good. Let's not get the 3-win run that like tanks it to like 8.9, right? Let's just stay here. So that's what I would say for those of you going for the leaderboard. Good luck. It is definitely a marathon. I know some people do 90, 100, 130 runs a month. Most people aren't like that, I know. So plan it out, make sure you're in the proper mindset. And if you're unlucky enough in the position where you have a really good average after like 23 or 25 runs, think about reevaluating your tier list. That's it.
Cool. Question from the GOAT, guys. Brought to you by our patrons. Patreon.com/grinninggoat. Thank you guys so much. As always, keeping the lights on here at the Lightforge podcast. And we're going to end this. We're not playing a run after this because it's not pre-recorded. So we are just ending this on Card Good Bad. A lighter note, a interesting card Good Bad, Dark Conviction, 110, which is around the average card you're going to pick for your deck. Actually a little lower. So not good or bad, or sometimes good, sometimes bad. But what do we want to talk about for Dark Conviction? Why did we pick this after going with back-to-back super powerful cards of Ultimate Infestation and Crypt Lord, right? Like similarly amazing cards that have been released for KFT.
All right. Yeah, look, Dark Conviction, it's right now, what, a 110 on the tier list?
110 on the tier list.
Yeah. This is not going to be one of those where we're like, oh, it's so freaking good, you have to pick it, and here's why it's so freaking good. The reason I want to talk about Dark Conviction this week is just because it, once again, provides Paladin with a tool that I think, not that they didn't have it before, because it does this kind of similar thing to Humility and Outdoor Peacekeeper, right? It turns something big into something small. What it does is it changes the math of how often you should expect it from a Paladin. Because when there, post Keeper of Oldemont and pre Dark Conviction, I just didn't really think about Humility or Outdoor because Humility wasn't picked very often. And Outdoor, you just can't really play around it. Now, whenever I'm thinking about putting something down, I think, well, there's an offering bonus to Dark Conviction if they haven't played a card for a while. And if this royally just screws me up or causes me to lose, maybe I go with the second play that I have, because I see Dark Conviction a lot now, right? It's not just like, well, if they have Outdoor, they have Outdoor. You should really think about Dark Conviction. You should play around
People overdraft this card all the time.
Yeah, they do. So it changes the way that you think about the Paladin matchup. So, and I think that's very important, especially with what we said. Classes sort of play similarly now. Any card in which it changes the way you play against a class, or just the risk assessment that you do on a turn-to-turn basis, it's very meta impacting, even if it's not supremely powerful.
Right. Yep. It's a meta impact card. It's like Alderman's gone and came back, but in a much nicer form.
Yeah.
Very much appreciate that it is Dark Conviction and that it is not for 2 extra mana attached to 3/4 body. Okay. So yeah, Dark Conviction. Another, like, this is, I think I like Dark Conviction as a card because it basically enshrines in the Paladin what we have known and suspected for a while. Like, you don't want to introduce new concepts to a class with Keeper of Oldemont. Bad things happen when that happens. You want to introduce concepts to the class in its pure form, like a Dark Conviction. It's like, hey, look, guys, you know how like Paladins used to be able to Humility? You Paladins can Dark Conviction now. 3/3s are a thing for Paladins now. That's their version of soft removal now, okay? Because we wanted to, make them not just Humility stuff. That was a little one-dimensional. We needed this for Constructed or whatever. And so you introduce a card, it does the job, people get used to it, you can see how powerful it is, and then you try to do Keeper of Oldemon. I bet that if they had released Dark Conviction for an expansion before Keeper of Oldemon would be a 3/3.
Yeah, I think so.
So again, right? Not a terribly powerful card, but definitely a usable card. You'll have it in your deck. It's gonna be nice. And when you use it, your use case for it, what you really want to do, like try to hold it for this one use case, is you use it and you eat a minion. You don't want to use it and then trade into it, right? You try not to use it on your own minions because it's just not as good to, even if it's a 1/1, to bring a 1/1 to a 3/3. That's the same as a 2 mana +2/+2, right? That's not a very good card. This card is better than that. So you're going to try to use it in the optimal situation if possible, but it has the safety, right, of, well, if I need to, I'll just use it to remove something. As long as I have 3 damage, I can just remove something that's really problematic off the board. Like, I don't want that Lich King to stay alive for one more turn. I don't care if all I have is a Raptor that can remove it. I will trade these 2 cards for that 1 card. And having that safety is always nice. So it has some flexible uses, but its general use case is actually like very specific. Like, to actually get the value out of this card, it is an incredibly specific scenario where you have something that can eat a 3/3 on the board and your opponent plays something huge.
Yep.
So you want to save for that situation.
Yep.
Okay, that's it for card good bad. Let's do a bad card next time. We're doing all these good cards. And that's it. That's it for me. You have anything else you want to add?
That's it, guys. Enjoy the KFT arenas, and we will see you next week.
Bye.
See ya.